Welcome to another wild edition of our Tempo Storm Deck Spotlight series, featuring Control Warrior. With the Wild Meta Report having been recently released, it was revealed to the world that Druid is here to stay in Wild by holding the top 2 spots in the meta report with Azalina Druid and Togwaggle Druid. With their prevalence on the latter, deck creators have to take Druid into consideration in their deck building. This is very similar to how players needed to build their decks in the pre-nerf Naga Sea Witch era. However, rather than mass AoE removal, decks are teching in disruption effects, like Dirty Rat, Deathlord, Ancestor's Call, and Gnome Feratu. This has led to a fairly polarizing meta, with combo and aggro decks becoming more prevalent and few pure control decks in sight. This environment has nurtured one of early Hearthstone's most iconic decks back into the limelight, Control Warrior. Control Warrior traditionally had massive issues with dealing with any other control decks over the past 5 or 6 expansions, which has led to a significant lack of the deck on the ladder and a huge decrease in its tier ranking. However, maybe once every expansion, there would always be someone who hit rank 1 legend with the deck. The general consensus of the deck was that it was a good deck against aggro and a fair deck against combo, just that it was almost auto-lose against control. Therefore, if you were to hit a pocket meta without control decks, you were able to accomplish a lot. Well, due to Druid's prevalence on the ladder, the meta has much less control than any of the past 5 or 6 expansions, and Control Warrior is back to try and claim some of its former glory. One of the big benefits that Control Warrior has is that it naturally does well against combo decks. With the inherent ability to gain armor, OTK decks tend to struggle with Control Warrior. Access to armor gain cards and a defensive hero power really hamper decks whose game plan is to kill you with burn out of hand. Add in the fact that the Control Warrior shell is perfect to include disruption effects like Dirty Rat and Deathlord alongside cheap removal that's already run in the deck, and you can achieve quick success in disrupting your opponent's combo. At the start of this expansion, Control Warrior seemed like a deck-building puzzle. Aside from some fringe play, the deck has seen little play over the past few expansions, which inevitably resulted in the deck list being fairly unrefined. The main difference between the various forms of the deck was that there were around 4 to 5 different win conditions that the deck tried to be built around. Among the most classic versions of Wild Control Warrior is the N'Zoth version, which maximized the anti-combo strategy and taunt stats of Deathlord. Dragon was a big proponent in bringing this variant back into the meta, finishing rank 2 legend last season, with this deck bearing a significant contribution to his finish. Recruit Warrior was a big proponent of the end of last metagame and hit the ground running into this one. Keith Numbers piloted this variant to legend at the end of last expansion and upgraded his deck list once the expansion hit. The deck was relatively defensive, relying on massive armor gain to stop Starline or Druid kills, and having really large minions in hand works out really well with the new legendary Boomship card. Along with all the other decks running hand disruption cards like Dirty Rat, they have to face large threats that are hard to get rid of. The final major variant of Control Warrior is Odd Warrior. This deck isn't really attached to a particular player, as it seems to have slipped into the meta through its mainstay in Standard as a strong meta deck. However, the meta in Standard is much different than in Wild. While the Baku hero power allows you to absolutely crush aggro matchups, even more than any of the other variants, the main concern for Wild at the moment is Druid. And with the loss of Dirty Rat and Execute, this deck is poorly adapted for the meta. This version of the deck has been used more as a counter-queue deck on the Legend ladder rather than a pure climbing deck, as it falls more into the vein that Control Warrior did in the past few expansions. If you hit a meta pocket of all aggro, you will do well with this deck. If you hit control or combo, then you're in for a rough time. The 4th variant of Control Warrior groups together the rest of the other attempts at building lists, as most of them deal with fatigue or drawing through your deck quickly. Versions of the deck that fit into this sub-archetype include Dead Man's Hand Warrior and Control's Iron Juggernaut Warrior. This version of the deck has seen the least amount of refinement, as it seems to be attacking the meta in a similar approach to that of N'Zoth variant, but with less successful results. At the moment, it seems that N'Zoth Warrior has performed the best out of the available sub-archetypes of the deck, just due to the prowess of removal against Druid and being good enough against the aggro looking to counter Druid. Due to the vast differences between the sub-archetypes of Control Warrior at the moment, we won't go into all the possible tech cards for the deck. Rather, we'll focus in on some of the Boomsday cards which are being featured in some of these decks, and a few old cards which are being used in new and interesting ways. Dr. Boom himself is the first major tech card for Control Warrior. He poses an interesting question in your deck. Does his hero power help you out more than your normal hero power? In most of the wild versions of the deck, Yes, his hero power can help you in some of the late-game grindy matchups. However, against decks like Druid, you are often looking to continuously gain armor to avoid large damage OTKs. And the inclusion of Dr. Boom prohibits you from gaining additional armor consistently after he's been played. Often if you have Dr. Boom in one of these matchups, he lies as a dead card in your hand, often being an emergency gain 7 armor for 7 mana card. One of the other tech cards that's been popping up in most of the Control Warrior lists is Weapons Project. With the ability to gain 6 armor on the spot and the flexibility for lists to run weapon removal, you can often use this card in a non-equivalent manner, because you can capitalize on the armor with the Shield Slam, or as a way to draw cards with Harrison Jones. The final tech card that we'll take a look at is Azalina Soulthief. This tech is actually taken from standard variants of the deck, most notably ported into the Wild metagame by our Wild expert Danny Donuts. This is a good utility card in both the Druid matchup and the dreaded Control matchup. Against Druid, you'll often get off to a quick armor lead against the deck, but as the Druid plays their Death Knight, you'll start falling behind in the armor race unless you run Justicar or Baku, both of which are bad deck building choices. Specifically against Warrior, Star Aligner Druid typically assembles its combo rather quickly, but it's not able to play all the cards from hand because of the armor total of the Warrior. Azalina allows for you to attempt to steal your opponent's combo, then take them out with their own deck. Against Togwaggle, the Azalina allows you to get your deck back through copying your opponent's hand infinitely, and you're able to often win that matchup through the Azalina counterplay. Matchups against control decks like Reno often come down to fatigue, and your opponent often has a handful of more resources than you do at the end of the game. Azalina allows you to gain a few more resources in your final push at the end of the game, or if you're using all your resources defending against an early game push, a way to refill your hand, allowing you to stay in the fight a little bit longer and fight with more resources than you normally would have. However, the downside to this card is that it's an absolute dead draw against aggro. That being said, with the rest of your tools, you should have very few issues fending off aggro with all the removal that's packed into the deck anyway. Floating one card in the aggro matchup is worth it for a better chance at the control matchups if you start running into a slower meta, that is. It's really interesting to see how a deck that only received minor support can jump up the tier list based solely off the meta itself. With Control Warrior back on the roster of viable decks, this Blast from the Past deck really is a good tool when used correctly, able to face down aggro or disrupt the combo Druid decks which are plaguing the latter. This deck is extremely meta dependent, but based on what we've been seeing over the past few weeks, it seems like the right deck to make big waves on the Wild ladder. Thank you for watching our deck spotlight on Control Warrior. Don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed the video and subscribe for more Tempo Storm news and Hearthstone content. We'll see you next time.